Hello everyone, this is Miss AG and today we're going to be doing a realistic hair tutorial. First off, pick a mid-tone for your hair. So we'll do brown, so that'll be our mid-tone. Basically kind of the base. Let's move it over a bit. Basically this will be the base of the hair. And then next you'll want to highlight. So go a little bit higher in your color picker, whatever program you're using. That'll be our highlight color. And this little color palette over here is just to make it a little easier when you're picking colors. You can use your color picker. And then you'd want to do a shadow, or the darker tones. And those are good for now, and then eventually you'll probably want a little bit brighter for brighter highlights. Oops, there we go. And even darker shadows. But you don't have to put those on yet, you can just those later. So we're going to start with the base color, and this is just going to represent my face today. And we're going to draw this. My settings for my brush are, well, I have a very large file open, but the hardness is set around 34-35% is usually what I aim for, and the opacity is at 100%, and that just kind of gives you that kind of stroke. So we're going to fill in the hair, and anytime I make a mark and I don't like it, I'm hitting Command Z for a Mac. I believe it's Alt Z for a Windows, just to kind of give some tips there. So let's just draw in a brief little hairstyle for her or him. And that's just good enough for our purposes of this tutorial. Alright, so now what I do is I take my brush and I make it a bit smaller, so whatever your scale is, do it a bit smaller diameter. So I'm just bumping it down with the brackets keys, and this is Photoshop if I hadn't mentioned that before. I'm going to change my opacity of my brush down to about between 25 and 21%. So when I pick up this lighter color and I make a mark, it's not quite as bright. It doesn't have as much opacity, so it's not quite as bright. So I take that and I pick up this color. So I'm picking the highlights and the darker tones, and I'm going to switch between these two for now. And what you do is you start defining the shadows and the highlights of the hair. So we'll just go in with the brush, the shadow. So we'll go in with the highlights first. Make a couple highlights, and while you're doing that you can add a few shadows too, and you'll start to kind of see it'll look a little 3D if you add shadow, highlight, shadow, highlight. You don't want to go too crazy. Okay, so already that looks a bit more two-toned for the hair. So now what we're going to do is we're going to make our brush a little smaller, and this is kind of the technique. You just keep refining from here on out, making your brush smaller and going in, and you can darken your color a bit as you go too, and that might help speed it along a bit, but it's also, there's something for the technique if you just simply take your time with it. So we're just going to keep adding some shadows and every once in a while some highlights, as I'm doing here. Okay, make my brush a little smaller again. So these are my strokes now. We're going to go in. Okay, do some more highlights. And make my brush smaller again. We're going to pick up the lighter and the darker ones this time. So we'll go in with the darker colors. And you can see it's starting to give it sort of a hair look right now, and I know it's Still pretty rough, but you're starting to get the idea. And when you come down here now with the smaller brushes, I should say, you're going to want to start shaping your hair kind of in points. Hair naturally kind of clumps together in points at the base of its, or at the tips of it, and for most hairstyles. And then I'm going to add some little tufts over here, a few down here. And a good way to do the pointed shape is, instead of trying to stroke it down every time like that, makes it a little harder. I usually tend to make my first curve and then stroke it upwards. It's just a bit easier to start from that point to make your pointed shapes. So we're going to do a little bit more of that. Add a little more detail up there. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger right now and define the roots, because this will be where the light isn't picked up too well. It's closer to the scalp. And go in now and make a few more obvious areas for the shadows. Okay, and we're going to make our brush even smaller, and I'm going to do a few more highlights. They're going to start sticking out a bit more, so you'll want to be a little more careful with how you stroke. If you mess up and do that and you have a history, just go back and delete it. But don't worry about these ends that don't look blended yet. I'm going to show you how to blend those in just a minute. So let's keep adding a few highlights. Okay, and a few more darker strands mixed in there. This gives the hair a lot of texture. I'm going to add a few more highlights here. Just gives the hair a lot more texture and gives it that single strand look. Okay, and we're going to do some blending. So you want to make your brush a little bigger, and I'll remind you that your opacity setting this whole time has been about 25 to 21%, or to 20%. So to blend these areas, what you're going to do is you're going to pick up the colors next to them with your eyedropper, and if you're not sure how to do that, just try to pick a color. So for instance, I want this color, so I'm going to pick a color that's close to that, and then when I go in with my low opacity, you can sort of blend it in. I'm making my brush just kind of whatever size it needs to be. You just blend these areas in. And I know it seems like you're kind of deleting some of your work, but the point of having the low opacity tools is to make sure those strands still stick out a bit even when they're blended in. So we're going to go through any areas where you see the sharp line ends. I'm going to go through and delete them, or not delete them, blend them in. And then some areas too, if they look a bit choppy, you can just blend those in too. Okay, I'm going to define my shadows while I'm at it a little more. Give the hair more contrast. Normally I would go in and make that real dark, and depending on where my light source was, but we're not really using a light source for this, so it's okay. Alright, we're going to take our brushes now, and we're going to finish off, refine these tips a bit more. So I'm going to go in and get these a little bit smaller. I mean a little bit more defined. A little more, few random strands that stick out. Okay, and make your brush even smaller now. And what we're going to do is add a few like stray strands of hair, and it kind of makes it look cool if you do this. So basically it just sort of gives it a wind whipped look. Okay, and you can do some final blending anywhere that those ends stick out a bit. Make it a little bit more smooth and unnoticeable. Okay, and then just any extra refining you want to do, anything, you know, if you want to add like another layer of hair over that goes like, you know, curves out or anything, you can do that now. And one last little trick I'm going to show you guys is if you're on Photoshop or any program that has a dodge tool, you pick it up and you get the exposure to about 21%, and I'm on mid-tones. And then if you just make a couple little arcs over like that, it kind of gives your hair a shiny look. And that's about it. You would need to refine your hair a little bit more, but that should do it for how to draw realistic hair. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And thank you for watching.